Hello again, so Kevin Walker from Unity Audio. We're the UK distributor for Empirical Labs, and I'm proud to say we have been from pretty much day one. We've been doing distressors now, Empirical Labs, for 20 years, and I remember having the 7th one ever made. They're now up to 27,000 distressors after 20 years. Phenomenal, successful product for an expensive piece of equipment. I mean, it truly is a classic. That word gets bandied around a lot in our industry, but this is worthy of being called a classic. Absolutely. It's a compressor, but it's just more than just a compressor. In actual fact, I call it the Swiss Army knife of dynamics. It can do pretty much anything you'd ever want a piece of dynamics outboard to do. Extremely versatile. That's the name Distressor here. Just explain what that's all about. So, dist means distortion, and the ressor is the compressor element. So it's a combination of distortion and compressor. That's where the name Distressor comes from. Great story. So Dave Durr, the founder, designer of the Distressor, used to run, before we got into this business of manufacturing, he used to run a recording studio in New York, and very successfully. And he had a 2-inch, at the time, he had a 2-inch 16-track machine. Arguably, 2-inch 16-track machines, one of the fattest sounding tape machines you could get, still is. Great dynamics, big bottom end, impact. And then he switched, like a lot of people did, switched to a 2-inch 24-track. And him and his customers were saying, Dave, where's all the dynamics gone? Where's all the punch and the bottom end from that tape machine? And he started to look into this, and he started fiddling around. He was into electronics, and he started sort of analysing things and came up with the basis for the principle of the Distressor, using a combination of sort of harmonics, distortion, as well as compression to try and emulate. He was trying to emulate the sound that fat 2-inch 16-track machine gave, and he did a pretty good job of achieving that. You can get that kind of fatness back using something like a Distressor. So that's kind of the history of it. Some people think it's a valve unit. It's not a valve unit. It's an analog unit, but it's a digitally controlled analog unit. It can emulate other famous compressors like the 1176, LA2A, DBX160X, and a few other ones. But it's not trying to be hang its hat on just being I replicate other things. It has very much its own sound and own characteristics, and it's in its own right. But it's interesting that it can emulate some of these other sort of well-known, famous, well-liked, loved compressors too. So that's the overview of what it is and how it came about. Let's go into a bit more detail now and show you exactly what this can do. Okay, so we're going to take a bit more of a detailed look at the front panel of the Distressor. So starting on the left here, we've got gain reduction meter at the top here. Sorry.
Sorry?
Let me go again. So we're going to look at the front panel a little bit more detail here and show you exactly what you can do and what features it has. So at the top, we have a very detailed, large gain reduction meter, so you can see very clearly exactly how much gain reduction is going on, and you can have huge, ridiculous amounts of gain reduction happening on this. And I'll come to that in a sec. And you can be very subtle too. So with the ratio button here, you can step through compression ratios. You have a 1-to-1, very gentle 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, going all the way through to an opto setting like the LA2A opto compressor from Uri, and you can even go to this crazy setting called nuke, which is great if you want to get a massive rock, sort of John Bonham-esque Led Zeppelin drum sound. You could have 2 room mics, put it through a pair of distressors, put it to the nuke setting, and it's just instant heavy rock drum sound. It's a fabulous setting. Moving on, you've got little indicators here. You can see you've got a 1% THD, total harmonic distortion indicator here, and then a red line. I'll come back to that in a second, but just bear that in mind. So you have traditional things like input level, of course, attack, release, output on these very distinctive knobs here. You can have, it's capable of very, very fast attack and release time, insanely quick attack and release, very long too. But quite a lot of people want fast attack and fast release compressors. Valve compressors, although they sound lovely, that's normally a tricky thing for them to do, is getting fast attack and release times. But this is more than possible on this unit. Moving back to this middle section here, you have a sidechain or detector path section. So this is not in the audio path, but these little facilities can help you out of a few sort of troublesome areas, like you have a high-pass filter here. So what this would be useful for is, you know, sometimes if you were to use a compressor across the whole mix, let's say, for example, and it's maybe a dance track where you've got traditionally, you know, you have a very prominent kick drum, and that kick drum sort of pulls down everything else while it's going along. Now, that's an effect that some dance people quite like, but you might not always want that. So you can patch in the high-pass filter in the detector path, it's not in the audio path, and it'll just mean that it sees that low end, it'll filter out that low end information and won't, in the detector path, and won't trigger the compressor to suck the life out of everything else when that big bass drum comes along every time. So that's an example of what that high-pass filter can do in the detector path. You also have this one here. So this is like a mid-range filter, again in the detector path. Whereas if you've got like an edgy guitar track or an edgy vocal track, say, if you pop this in, that'll just compress out some of those harsher mid-range frequencies. And that could be all you need to do rather than grabbing an EQ and changing the tonality of the track, the guitar track or the vocal track. That might get you out of the spot of having an edgy vocal. If you have two distressors, you can stereo link them. Okay, that's how you do that. And then moving on, and then you can have combinations of things. So you can have any combination of those three functions working together, okay? That turns them off. And then in the audio path, you have a high-pass filter, which will roll off the bottom end. And then you get into the distortion characteristics. So distortion 2 and distortion 3 will give you sort of odd and even harmonic distortion. One would be more akin to what you would typically get with an analog tape machine, when you hit an analog tape machine really hard, you know, hit that tape hard. And one would be distortion from, say, a console, sort of transformer-based distortion or something along these lines. So, you know, again, you can have combinations of these things going on, high-pass filter with the two different distortion elements happening. For example, you could have a situation where you're not really compressing very much, maybe a gentle 1 or 2, but you could have quite a bit of harmonic distortion going on if you're driving it hard from the console, for example, and you have the input gain set high on this. So you can get in some real kind of rich, complex tones with the distressor. You have a bypass here. Obviously, you need a bypass to do some comparisons. The Brit mod version has a few other little tricks up its sleeve. Stereo image link. Any standard distressor you can stereo link anyway. The stereo image link gives you a different way of linking them, because traditionally, the way what happens when you link two regular distressors is that you can get sort of image shifting. If something is very dominant level-wise on one part of the stereo field, then it can pull the other side down, and you can get some sort of imbalances going on. If you employ the stereo image link, it offers a different way of stereo linking the distressors, and you don't get that it retains the stereo balance, basically. You don't get that kind of shifting of left and right. Or you can do a combination of that. You can actually, any compressor will actually allow you to do a combination of the three different ways of stereo linking. You know, this, here, this, or a combination of the two. So you can have a combination of image shifting and not. So it's something you have to sort of experiment with and try. Different mixes might work better on different settings. But it's, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's an incredibly versatile piece. So it's just giving you lots of different options. And moving on, the Brit mod function here, what that does, the old Yuri 1176 compressor, which is still a classic and a favourite to this day, a lot of British engineers back in the sort of 70s and so on, they found a trick where you could jam in all 4 of the compression ratio buttons simultaneously. You weren't supposed to do that. You didn't design it to do that, but as is the way with a lot of equipment in studios, people try things out and they discover new sounds. So this is what this does. This emulates, replicates that all compression ratio buttons in on 1176, and you get a kind of crazy compression ratio going on. Really good on bass guitar in particular. That's a favourite for me. I can't rate this Distressor highly enough. If you could only have one compressor in your rack, I would choose this over anything every time. It's a absolute classic, totally versatile, great on individual vocals, instruments, very subtle, very controlling. On the flip side, it can be completely insane, really over-the-top compression with lots of character, with the distortion elements kicking in. Good on a stereo bus also, great for stereo bus work. You can't go wrong. So there's a couple of different flavors of the Distressor. There's the original one, it's called the EL8, that's mono. Then there's the EL8XM, essentially the same thing. This is what we have here, by the way, an EL8XM. It has the additional 2 switches here, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail a bit later. And you can get stereo versions. They're not actually one-piece stereo unit. What they do at the factory is they calibrate 2 separate mono units and give you the stereo link cables. You can stereo link this, of course. So again, you can get a stereo without the Brit mod. This is called the Brit mod, these 2 switches here. Or you can get a stereo version called the 8XS with the Brit mod functions. And the Brit mod version is probably the most popular one these days. It's the one we sell most of.